The entire contents of this podcast and website are based upon the opinions of Tammy Garcia and her guests, unless otherwise noted. The information on this podcast is not intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified healthcare professional and is not intended as medical advice. It is intended as a sharing of knowledge and information from the research and experience of Tammy Garcia and her guests. This is the Naturally Inspired Podcast, coming to you from our 1890 homestead in Johnstown, Colorado. I'm Tammy, and I want to thank you for joining us. Let's get started and help people feel good so they can do what they love for longer. Today on the Naturally Inspired Podcast, our guest is Dr. Mary Rondeau. Mary is a registered naturopathic doctor, a functional medicine specialist, and a registered herbalist. She received her doctorate from Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine. Mary has been involved in naturopathic medicine since 2005. She co-founded the Wholeness Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is one of the most integrative mental health centers in the U.S. Welcome, Dr. Mary, to the Naturally Inspired Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to tackle this issue with you and just get all kinds of good nuggets that we can give to our listeners. So at first, I'd like to get our listeners acquainted with you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born?
So I am a third generation native Coloradoan, and so right here in Fort Collins, yeah.
Oh, no way. You're born here and you're still here.
Born here, still here. Yep.
That's rare nowadays. Yeah. That's awesome. What do you love about Colorado?
I think the question is more, what don't I like about Colorado? No. Yeah. Colorado's great. I got to say the winters do tire on me a little bit, but but I mean, there's really no better place to be when you grow up in a place like this. How can you not come back? It's just got everything.
So many days of sunshine.
I know.
Which is probably my favorite thing about living here.
Yes.
Even when we get snow, we still see the sun.
Still see the sun. Beautiful. Right. Yep.
I'm from Vancouver Island, Victoria. Mm-hmm. And so we get, sometimes we get weeks on end with no sun. It can be hard.
Wow. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, it can be hard. Definitely. So do you live with your family there in Fort Collins?
Yes. Yeah. So I have a husband who's also a naturopathic doctor, and then we have two boys. And so, and then all my extended family is here as well, which is always fun.
Nice. So you're a mom, and how old are your kiddos?
5 and 7.
Nice. And they're two boys?
2 boys. Yep.
Yeah. Woo, that's fun.
They keep me busy. It's super fun.
Yeah, I bet. So how did you get interested in natural medicine?
Well, I think like a lot of people who are in the natural health field, there's some kind of personal story that drives you there.
Yes.
And so, like I said, I read your story, and, mine was more of a personal health journey itself that got me into natural health, of just kind of not really being satisfied with the answers and kind of struggling with some health stuff over my life. I think what brought me into the mental health realm was different. My business partner, Dr. Scott Shannon, he and I met 11 years ago now, and with my husband, and we kind of talked about this vision of this clinic, and he was looking to kind of form this community, and we just really hit it off. And so that kind of drove me into the mental health side, which was actually an unexpected surprise. I really didn't feel like I would end up in mental health. And, but I have to say, what an amazingly rewarding profession that this has been. There's just so much difference you can make in a person's life when they are debilitated to the point where, they have such horrible anxiety that they can't get their kids to school, or they're just not functioning. And to see people come out of their shells and do that, it's so incredibly rewarding, because you just give their life back, which is great.
I can imagine now. Did you grow up in a household where like natural medicine or remedies were used? Is that how you kind of established your belief?
Yes, to some degree. So my mom was born and raised in France. And so we were raised in a very European style, but our roots are actually Ukrainian. And so, we would walk the mountains and forage mushrooms and plants, and she would say, this is what is for this, and this is what's for this. And so that was kind of the thing that my mom and I did, is every year we would get a book growing up, and we would go and try to find and identify the plants and figure out historically what they were used. And if she knew it from her past,
Right.
then, of course she would share that. And so we were always very holistically minded in that sense, that we,
Uh-huh.
you live from the land, you
Yeah.
take care of your body first. It's not kind of just this reckless abandon approach to life, and then when something breaks, fix it. And
Right.
so I think there's that mindfulness that was ingrained in me at such a really young age. And then the passion for food came with that. I mean, what do you say? Being raised by
Right.
a French lady,
Yeah, I guess.
it was all about food and just quality of food. And, we
Right.
always turned our own butter, and, all these things that, I didn't realize at the time was such a unique upbringing.
Yeah.
But I see it now, and I'm so very
Right.
thankful for it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find it so interesting. A lot of our practitioners that I've interviewed have this kind of attachment to the earth, so to speak, either being raised on a farm or just this appreciation for nature. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's such a interesting thing to share with our audience, because we're all raising kids, and it's hard to kind of incorporate that today, because there's so
Yes.
much technology and whatnot. But if you do want to instill that in your kids, then a great way to do it is just to get out. Right?
Get
Get out
outside.
in nature.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
actually what we started doing with our boys. So even though our boys are young, I've already taught them to forage mushrooms. And granted, that can be a slippery slope, but I mean,
Yeah.
they're in the process of identifying them, but they're not allowed to touch them until they point them
Right.
out. And you know what I mean? So we have pretty
Yeah.
strict rules, but it's just more the idea. And we harvest berries, and they help pick them. And then we turn it into a jelly or a compote, and they can see that direct relationship on the labor that it
Right.
takes to
Yes.
get one little jar of this like wild blueberries. Oh my goodness.
Right.
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 And so,
But also
that's
to
part of
have
it.
them have the confidence to know, because I think that's a big piece of why maybe people don't forage or go out and make decisions, to grow their own food or whatever. They're a little bit nervous about if it's going to be okay. If
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna, and so if you're raising kids like that, then that confidence comes about, that they know, oh, this is okay. They start to
Sure.
believe in their own knowledge, which
Yep.
is what
As
you
long as you
need.
set those ground rules. I mean, you can't just
Yeah.
eat red berries and mushrooms. Be in a world of hurt before we know it.
Yeah. The idea is a lifelong journey there of
Yes,
learning.
totally.
Maybe don't
Totally.
send them out to their 18 or maybe 25 when that frontal lobe is done.
Exactly. Totally. So, but I think it's so important for that exposure component
Yes.
of just like, this is where food comes from, and
Absolutely. And then, that belief is so powerful too, because then they're not running to, pills or whatever for cures right away.
mhm.
They're willing to try other things first, because they know that these things are, healing to the body, or more nutritious to the body. So
Yep,
very
exactly.
cool.
Mhm.
Very cool. So I'm going to jump right in, and I want to know about your biomedical nutritional assessment that you do there at your clinic.
Mhm.
What does that mean, and how is it done?
So, when we talk about mental health, generally speaking, is an assessment from the neck up. If we think about it in the most conventional sense,
Yep.
okay, it is a very subjective interview, which means that it's an interview with a person. They come to their own conclusions, not really based on any laboratory testing, and therefore a diagnosis is made, and therefore a treatment is recommended.
Right.
So, what we're trying to do is change the course of mental health, where we're bringing in more objective data.
Right.
So the biomedical nutritional assessments is part of that objective findings, or what I call the neck down. So we kind of separate, right? Mental health is always separated, where the neck, for some odd reason, is not attached to this body, and therefore
Right.
there's no influence from the neck down. We know that that's a really incorrect, or I would say glass half full kind of model. And so
Yeah.
if we look at the glass full model, it's saying, well, what is the neck up assessment and what is the neck down assessment?
Right.
So as part of the biomedical nutritional assessments, we're looking at what is the specific biochemistry in the body, what are the pathways that we can look at that may have contributing factors to any mental health conditions. And so it might require a urine test or a blood test or spit test, but we're getting some type of objective findings to see, is there a metabolic pathway, or basically a pathway in the body that we can then manipulate in some fashion,
Hmm.
whether it's lifestyle, diet, sleep, supplements, herbs, I mean, you name it. We have a lot of tools
Right.
that will give us more information on what might be happening in the body.
Okay. So are these deficiencies that you're looking for then? When you talk about pathways, what do you mean by that?
So our bodies are basically a big ball of chemistry, right? Or
Yes.
biochemistry. Everything
Right.
is a reaction, right? There are enzyme pathways.
Yep.
Those pathways require certain nutrients to make that pathway go. So
Okay.
part of it is saying, are there nutritional deficiencies? And how
Hmm.
does that nutritional deficiency affect the greater system of the body?
Okay.
But it's also looking at not only deficiencies, but is there something in that pathway that is maybe not working as well, like an enzyme? And so I think a real common
Ah,
one that we hear about is MTHFR, when you're talking about mental health conditions. And that is an enzyme that
okay.
basically helps with the conversion of folic acid into its active forms. Well, that
Okay.
enzyme requires certain nutrients. And
Okay.
so if we can pinpoint exactly what's missing, we can make even an inherited genetic component work better, right? And so it's kind of
Wow,
just
that's
digging in deep. And it's
fascinating.
hard. It's hard if you don't have a background in chemistry or biochemistry to
Right.
look at the body in such small pieces. So I
Yeah.
think some aspects it's a little bit harder to explain, but
Right.
I always kind of try to explain it's like building a Lego, right? And
Right.
especially the Lego sets we have now, right? It's like
Right.
they're so intricate, but you still start with one building block. And if you mess
Right.
up in one of those early pages, by the time you get up here, it's like, oh my gosh, the
It's
wing
not
on
the
my jet is
product.
not going on.
Right.
Right? You have to
Right.
backtrack all the way. So our bodies are very similar in that sense that we have building blocks. And so we need to constantly assess that foundation and see
Okay.
if there's anything that we can support better.
So when you offer support, you would be kind of trying to balance the pathway chemically. Is that a good way of putting it?
That's one option. Yep, is to balance
Okay.
it or giving more of what that pathway needs to run effectively. Okay,
Okay.
so a really good example is going back to that MTHFR. So there's big buzz about that word, right? And
Okay.
kind of what that pathway does.
Hmm.
But an incorrect way to look at it is I have this genetic mutation, and so now I just need really high doses of folate or methylfolate. Well, you can't just super dose one B vitamin in the body,
Right. Because
right?
there's
Because
cofactors
there's
and
cofactors, right?
right.
So in doing that, you might have a temporary correction that is appropriate, but
Right.
long term, you're creating more problems because
Right.
now you're flooding the system with only one of many nutrients that create a balanced equation.
Right.
So over time, that's problematic. Short term, person's probably going to feel better for a little bit. So it's kind
Interesting.
of like taking into all that account and when is it appropriate, like how much do people need. Big misconception too is that once people are on supplements, they need them forever. I mean, that's if I'm doing my job, then that is incorrect, right? What we're
Right.
doing is it's balancing, rebuilding, right? We're addressing our key foundational pieces, which is diet, sleep, and exercise, right? And healthy relationships. And so we've got
Hmm.
our pillars. And once those are addressed, right, you need less and less support, right?
Right.
So
You need
people
to always
shouldn't be
get
having
your
taking pills, right? Handfuls of pills.
right. But
Hmm.
you're always needing your kind of recommended daily allowance of nutrients. If you're not eating, all of your nutrients, then you can supplement on a regular basis with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And certain people are going to have higher needs for certain nutrients that they may or may not be able to achieve solely from diet. And
Yeah.
in that case, they probably might need,
Yeah.
long-term supplementation. But just to be on handfuls and handfuls of stuff, I mean, that's not really natural medicine. I mean,
Right.
you're just swapping out one pill for the other, but is the
Right.
person in necessarily a better place? So,
Right.
mhm.
But the benefit of using the supplements to kind of get someone out of that, over that hump,
Mhm.
is that that it will get them to a place where they can function better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. So
So it's
build that
almost like
foundation strong.
emergency medicine, really, for that situation in a
Tough,
way.
yes. In a way,
Yeah.
yes.
So you really enjoy working with families and children,
Mhm.
and in your clinic, you work with them quite often, from what I understand. Um, so what are some of the common things that families and kids are struggling with today, and that you're seeing at your center?
Well, I think it depends what age range we're talking about. So if we talk about, I would say a more common population, it's kind of divided, right? We get really young kids that are 4 and under that are having tantrums, they may
Okay.
be delayed developmentally in some capacity. They're just
Okay.
extremely picky eaters, just, having a lot of behavior problems at that age.
Okay.
And that's a very different thing of what we find versus our adolescent age range, right? Which is a more common group that's going to have depression and anxiety, right? And some behaviors. And so I think if we look at that adolescent population, we can, target a couple different areas that are pretty common. One would be screen time and the influences of social media sites, on a undeveloped brain, and kind of that immediate feedback, and just how much kids are using these sites now and how that's kind of changing relationships. I mean, that's being studied. It's not necessarily all negative, but it's really,
it's changing.
It's changing. It's changing. And so we've got a split paradigm of parents that don't understand that realm to kids with this new technology and kind of how to interface with that part. I think another area that's of a big focus that I see is that the increased pressures academically that we are seeing on kids at a younger and younger age. There's more availability of AP classes and honors classes and all these, and kids are taking as many credits as they can to basically eliminate 1 or 2 years of college credits. And what stress is that having on them? The population we see is skewed, right? So I'm not seeing the kids that are succeeding at managing their schedules, right? I'm seeing the kids that are struggling in some capacity, or they're managing their schedules and they're doing really well in school. It's coming out in a different way because now they can't sleep, or now they're anxious about going to school. Even though they're academically succeeding.
So when they're coming to see you, are you seeing more of a rise in anxiety and depression? If you read in the media today, there's a lot of information about the rise of anxiety and depression in our young population. And so what I'm hoping to offer today is a little bit of insight for parents that, can gauge when is a kid just kind of struggling, right? And when is a kid really, it's time to reach out for some help? And what could they notice there that would be the time?
Yeah. Well, I mean, every child is going to be different, and their communication level is going to be different. So I think one of the best things that parents can do is really get to know their friends, right? Because they're most likely at the ages after 13 are going to reach out to their social network first if they're struggling, rather than a parent, because that's what 13-year-olds do. I mean, they're more into their social network. And so as a parent of really developing those good relationships with the closest friends of your child, then that opens up communication channels with the friend to say, if there is a concerning text that comes through or something concerning that their child is experiencing that are not expressing to the parents, then that friend can go to them. And I can't tell you how many times that's exactly how kids end up in our office, is that so-and-so's friend just told me about this text she sent and it scared me. And so I called mom and I told mom about it. And now they're following up and really digging into that. And so I think that's a really good tip for parents is, not to overstate that, but to really know who's in their lives and develop a relationship yourself with those kids. To help
and even if your kid is struggling, I mean, I don't know how you feel about labels, but I'm very apprehensive about labels, and it doesn't mean, because how do you feel about this? I should ask you is, how do you feel about this? If you reach out for help for your kid, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be labeled right away. Correct?
Yep. And that is our philosophy too at the Wholeness Center, is that we do our best not to place any label on any child, right? Because we are treating people, we're treating kids, we are not treating a label of anxiety, right? Because that is just a label, and there are 100 different variations of anxiety. So that label doesn't really help me. What helps me is talking to the family and actually seeing what behaviors are we seeing? What are the fears? What's falling through, like where can we have entry points to help that child? So that's really important.
Yeah. And I think that's to kind of lower the stigma of, reaching out to somebody for help in situations with, call it just like a behavior situation that you're having. You don't need to feel like, I'm taking them to a mental health professional because there's this problem or that. It's a moment in time. It's a
Absolutely.
moment in time that your child is experiencing at this particular time. And you
Yep.
need to feel just great about reaching out to resources to
Hmm.
get that help and not worry about, oh, my kid's going to be labeled this or that. And because it doesn't mean that.
Correct. Correct. And a lot of times, I would say a fair amount of practitioners are pretty conservative with big labels for that reason, because I think it is contributing to the stigma, the negative stigma around mental health. When, I would hope that through the work we do is that we can eliminate that, because it isn't
Yeah.
about a label, and we don't treat based off of anxiety or depression. Like, that doesn't give us any more information. What gives us information is that interview, as far as that goes, and how many different things we can do. I mean, somebody with a simple magnesium deficiency is going to have restless sleep, difficult time falling asleep. They're going to have low
Yes.
mood, and they're going to be really tired. Well, that could be labeled
Yes.
as a whole bunch of things, but it's
Yes.
really a magnesium deficiency, because a good 60% of our population doesn't get the RDI recommended intake for magnesium. And over time,
Right.
that's going to really funnel down into a problem for a certain population.
And
So
it
it's testing
will,
that.
I actually, that's funny that you would bring that up because I've experienced a magnesium deficiency. I'm a
Hmm.
runner
Hmm.
and,
Oh, yeah.
I nursed two kids and,
Hmm.
was pretty active, for a long time. And I had some of those symptoms of a magnesium deficiency and struggled for a long time to figure out that that's what it was. But
Hmm.
it can manifest in different ways in
Absolutely.
different people.
Well, and I always say it's going to go to your weakest system, right? So let's say, for example, your weakest system is reproductive, right? So magnesium deficiency might come as severe menstrual cramping, right?
Hmm.
Where another person, it could be really low mood. For another person, it could be severe muscle cramping, could be constipation for somebody else. And so it's going to go to where our physiology is the weakest, right? I always use the analogy like our bodies are a bucket,
Yeah.
okay? And that bucket, we got a whole bunch of faucets that fill that bucket, and those faucets are stressors, right? So we have
Right.
mental, emotional stress. We have kind of our genetic stress of what we inherited.
Right.
We have nutritional stress. I mean, you name it, right? We can name everything that causes stress in our lives.
Right.
And we only have control over some of those spigots, but depending on how much they're turned on will determine when that bucket overflows. When that bucket
Right.
overflows is when symptoms occur. For
Right.
some people, it might be a migraine, could be PMS, could be,
Yes.
IBS flare, could be joint pain, it could be a lot of things, or could
Could
be
it be
anxiety.
behavior in a small child?
Absolutely. It could be, yeah, behavior, it could be aggression, it could be, a panic attack, it could be a lot of things, right? So our goal is to figure out, one, what are the faucets that are on for this person? How can we turn them off or
Right.
slow down the flow, right?
Right.
And help manage that. And so that is
Right.
part of that biomedical nutritional assessment, or what we would say is looking at it from a functional medicine standpoint, is kind of that neck down to how do we optimize things to reduce the stress burden in the body.
Right. I mean, how wonderful for people to learn that what you just said, because then it takes the burden off of you. It's not like you got something going on.
Right, right.
There's something physically going on inside of
Mhm.
here and it's causing this symptom or that symptom and your body's just speaking to you, trying
Yep.
to convey what's going on inside here, that there's a problem. That's what a symptom is your body
Yes,
talking to you. And if we could get people to see mental health from that perspective, how wonderful would that be? That
absolutely.
it's
And
not,
connecting the symptoms, right? So we know that
yeah.
about 50% of patients that have anxiety are diagnosed with IBS, right?
Oh,
But
interesting.
those
I didn't know that.
historically are seeing totally two different providers, right? So
Exactly.
you're
Yes.
seeing your primary care, or you're seeing a psychiatrist for the anxiety symptoms, then you're seeing a gastroenterologist for the IBS symptoms. Nobody's talking, saying, hey, guess what? There's this gut brain connection. We know the
Right.
whole field of the microbiome and kind of how those things interrelate. And if you address one, do these symptoms improve? And how do you address both at the same time? So you get this two-way improvement on symptoms,
Right.
right?
What other do you have another example you could give for us? That's such an excellent example, the IBS connected. Are there other things that go hand in hand like that we could help
Well, a lot of
with?
times it's gut stuff. So we know if we look at autism and children on the autism spectrum, it's
Uh-huh.
closer to 80% of kids on the autism spectrum have some type of digestive abnormality, whether it's
Wow.
diarrhea, severe constipation, bloating, gas, things like that, like abnormal digestive symptoms. on the
Wow.
autism spectrum. But autism is, it's most conventionally labeled as a behavior problem.
Yeah.
Well, if you couldn't communicate very well how
Right.
horrible your stomach felt,
Yeah.
right, I would be acting out too. And that is
Right.
exactly what we see. And so what they did is they did studies on children who had autism. They looked at the different bacteria that were in their guts. Okay, they isolated those bacteria, they injected them into mice, and guess what? The mice started banging their heads on the wall, started having really abnormal behaviors, and they isolated it down to
Wow.
this group of bacteria. And if we treat those kids after we find if that bacteria is present
Right.
and we eliminate that bacteria, guess what? Behavior improves in a percentage of them. Does it happen every time? No.
Right.
But are we seeing a significant enough improvement to say that, hey, we might be onto something here?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and it's a detective. It's a lot of detective work,
Mm-hmm.
and unfortunately, I think people want a one shot deal here. Like this is going to work for everybody, but we're
Yeah.
just so complex.
Yep.
There's
It
no
doesn't work that
way,
way.
but
Uh-huh.
it doesn't discount the
Mhm.
treatment,
Right.
right? Because it has worked for other people. And
Absolutely.
so what you have to do is be patient and try things because in the long term, it's going to benefit you much more to be kind of you know, eliminating, okay, that wasn't it. That's not the
Mhm.
problem, rather than putting stuff in and just keep putting stuff in that's causing, you know, s- uh, extra symptoms that you don't need that are then complicating finding the
Yep.
diagnosis.
Absolutely. And I think we
Wow.
discredit in terms of that these symptoms are related. So another really good example is with attention and focus issues
Yeah.
and really seeing neck down symptoms. So they found that kids that have more allergies, so seasonal allergies, more just allergies in general, environmental, indoor allergies, have
Right.
higher rates of attention deficit disorder, right? And so they think it
Yeah.
links back to histamine because histamine, as we know it, causes us
Yep.
to be itchy and sneezy and runny
Yep.
eyes, right?
Yeah.
But when histamine crosses the blood-brain barrier, it becomes an excitatory, which means a ramped up neurotransmitter that in a certain slice of population causes them to be very restless, right? Very
Wow.
restless. And
Interesting.
so in one child, it might be attention and focus. In another child, it could be anxiety, right? Because
Right.
histamine is associated with anxiety as well. So when we're treating
Wow.
seasonal allergies, it would be interesting to see if, does that change? And in fact, they've done studies. They've done studies to look at Ritalin by itself and
Yeah.
Ritalin paired with common antihistamines,
Uh-huh.
over-the-counter antihistamines like a Claritin.
Yeah.
And they found in the group that had allergies, the treatment of Ritalin and antihistamines, they did exactly the same. They basically were equally as effective, right? Think
Wow.
about that, right? An
Yeah.
antihistamine being equally as effective as Ritalin in a group of children. And when they paired them together, they did even better, right? So it's treating something below the
Wow.
neck and above the neck, right?
Right.
To really get to that common goal.
Yeah.
I mean, I have so many examples of different things, but that's, I think, really highlights the importance of a
Mm-hmm.
very good workup that is
Right.
very comprehensive, right?
Right.
And if you don't ask the questions, and a
Yeah.
child comes in for attention and focus, and all you focus on is when are they, what's happening with the behavior, what's happening at school,
Right.
that those are very important questions. But if we
Right.
don't branch out of that and actually look at neck down, are they allergic? Do they have eczema as a child? Are they diagnosed with asthma?
Right.
Do you need a year-round Zyrtec or Claritin? What's this? Or whether developmental delays, is there motor problems, right? You are going to
Right.
be able to figure out, is there another way to treat them?
Right. So a good plan of attack for a patient that would be coming in to see you would make a list of everything that's
Absolutely.
that's an issue. You
Which
know?
is what our intake does. And so I always apologize to patients when they come in. I'm like, oh, thanks for putting up with that intake, because
Right.
it's like an 8-page intake and it goes through
Right.
every single
Right.
system, and asks questions so that we can then hone in and in our intake really focus on those areas.
Right.
But it's nice. The more information we have, the
Of
better
course.
job I can do.
You're treating the whole
Mhm.
body. I know if you go to an allopathic doctor, a lot of times, there's some questions on there about your family history, insurance information, of course, and all that stuff, but they're not asking, I think, enough questions to get a full look at what's going on in someone.
Yeah, and I don't think it's fault to the physicians. I think that, they are doing the best job that they can with the
Right.
time that they're allowed. And I think
Right.
that insurance has really changed medicine over
Yes.
time. And when
Yes.
the average family practice visit is only 8 minutes, how can you?
Yeah.
Can you? So,
Impossible.
they're hitting highlights and they're doing the absolute best job that they can.
Right.
And so I really don't feel that it's a fault to the physicians. I think it's a breakdown in our
It's a
system of
system.
medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
because
a system
nobody goes
fault.
into medicine saying I only want the highlights. You know what I mean? Give me the cliff
Right.
notes. You know what I mean?
They
So
go in to help people.
they
Clearly,
go in to help people.
it's a rigorous
Yeah,
process to
it
become
is.
a doctor. And
But
then
it's hard when you are put in a box and you're not really given the liberty to do the best job that you can.
right.
Yeah.
So I think what we have to do as consumers
Hmm.
is demand better care,
Yeah.
demand by, voting with our dollars, quite
Hmm.
honestly. And you're worth it to spend the money. I know some of stuff's not covered by insurance or whatever, but we kind of have to get past that. We have to get past
Well,
that so we can get the
yeah.
care that we deserve.
And there's some ways around it, right? I mean, for most people now, we're working with really high deductible insurance plans anyways.
Yes. Yeah.
So they, by the end of the year, oftentimes aren't even hitting their deductible. So you might as well just
That's
go and
here.
seek out, yeah, might as well just
Never.
seek out the medicine that you are wanting
Exactly.
instead of staying in that insurance realm, because it's probably not going to save you that much in the end, right?
That's
And
right.
if we can improve our health status and those foundational components,
Yep.
we know from looking at corporate medicine, and like when people do wellness programs and they hit those markers, people are less sick in
Yeah.
all around chronic illness, everything, right? We
Right.
feel better, and you
Right.
need that. So in the end, right, it's kind of pay it now or pay it big
Yes.
later. You know,
Yes.
our health is worth stuff, you know.
Yeah,
And I will say too,
absolutely.
it's about choices. I think, is it the what can be sacrificed to have a visit? Is it the
Oh,
morning
yeah,
coffee out? You know what I mean? So we all make choices every single day on what we prioritize. And so I
exactly.
think sometimes it's just a little bit of regrouping.
Mhm.
Um, and
Swapping
it's
out.
swapping, and it's
Yep.
temporary, right?
Yeah,
It's temporary, and it's just about getting that new picture and really hitting those foundational pieces.
right. Looking at your health from a more proactive standpoint is what
Absolutely.
the mission of our podcast is,
Mhm.
to get ahead of this thing before, it really takes you out and then you don't have a lot of choices because you're in emergency mode.
Yeah. And I mean, and we are in an evolving health consciousness right now where people are
I think so
wanting
too.
this, and they
Yes.
are demanding it, and
Yep.
they are seeking it out when they can't get it to where they normally go. And
Yep.
I love it. More
I
power to
know.
do that. It's
I love
empowering.
it
And
too.
yeah, proactive medicine. That's where it's at.
Yep, absolutely. So you talked a little bit about screen time and you talked a little bit just about how, things are changing, and it's not necessarily bad or good. It's just that things are changing and we kind of have to adapt to learn more about this new world that our kids are living in. But one of the
Mhm.
things I wanted to talk about was um, I'm seeing a lot of articles and reading a lot of things about this kind of failure to launch syndrome that's going on.
Sure.
I don't know what
Uh-huh.
else to call it,
Yes.
but there's a lot of
Sure.
boomerang kids. I'm not sure. There's a lot of terms
Mhm.
about it. And, even through my experiences with some kids, they're a little reluctant to get their driver's license, or they're
Mhm.
just depending on mom and dad a little bit more than, say, myself or somebody I grew up with is, or was doing back then. They're just a little timid about that. And I'm interested to know just what your personal experience is with why you think that's happening.
Well, I'm not a psychologist, so I couldn't speak to it from that sense.
Right.
But I think I think one aspect is the overscheduling of our kids, right? And
Yeah.
so there is for me, what I see is there's a different sense of freedom that we experienced when we were younger.
Hmm.
That kids, with or without a driver's license, it's not really changing their free time. They don't have free time, and so I wonder how
Yeah.
that might be impacting things
Yeah.
as a whole. The
I
other
could
part too
see
is
that.
so much stuff is online. Like you don't have to go to get food you want delivered to you, to interact with your friends, all of this stuff all you need is a basement with a video game console, and
Yeah.
you're here with your buddies like they're right next to you.
Right. Or on your
So
phone chatting back
uh-huh.
and forth. You don't need to get together. You can have a group chat.
You absolutely. So I think there's just less desire, where when we were young, there wasn't any of that. I mean, dates us, right? There weren't even cell
I know.
phones, really, right?
Nope.
Weren't
Nope.
cell phones or any stuff. And so, and there was one line, yeah, we had call waiting, but I mean,
Yeah.
you,
And that
you
was big when
wanted,
that came in. Remember?
I totally remember. Yeah. My dad was so happy. We didn't get
Yeah.
a business sign in our house all the time now anymore. But yeah. And so when we were young, we had to have that freedom to go
Right.
out and have the social experiences and stuff like that. And kids are overstimulated as they are. So
Uh-huh.
what more do they need? Why? What's
Right.
that really going to give them? So
Right. My concern is that I think I see the rise in anxiety and depression, and I just wonder how that's linked with the non-contact,
yeah, absolutely.
you know?
And I mean, if we look at sleep studies, there's a difference between passive screen time and active screen time. So passive screen time is watching a movie. Okay.
Right.
Active screen time is anything where you do something and something changes, a video game. Okay.
Okay.
And they measured sleep quality in children
Uh-huh.
and showed that it only took 30 minutes of active screen time to disrupt deep sleep cycles, meaning that sleep quality was less in kids,
Interesting.
where it took 2 hours of passive screen time to hit the same levels of disruption,
Right.
right? And if you think a majority of our screen time now is active screen time, right?
Yes.
We're interacting, we're doing something, we're responding, and I would say 95% of kids that have access to screens are on there more than 30 minutes a day.
Right.
So what is that changing as far as sleep quality? And there
Right.
is plenty of studies that demonstrate decreased sleep quality, decreased sleep time associated with increased rates of mood disorders, depression, anxiety, right? You name it, right?
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
I think a big piece of this too is, what are we giving up? What are we trading off to have this screen time? And I think a big part of it is sleep and sleep quality,
Right.
which you give anybody.
I think you're right on that for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
I mean, remember when we had our little babes, like you're the
Yeah.
your life, right? And you're
Yeah.
not the most pleasant person. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it
I
just
had a
the way
premature
it is.
baby that needed to be fed every 45 minutes. So I don't even remember. There are chunks of time I do not recall.
Just don't recall.
They're
Yeah.
just gone. So
Yes. And and how many years it takes like new moms to recover from that.
yeah.
And now our younger populations are basically experiencing some form of chronic sleep deprivation from such a young age. And
Right.
what are we seeing the impacts of that? So
Right.
that's one thing. I'm a huge harbor with sleep, and
Yeah.
I have to say I'm pretty strict with our kids' sleep schedule, because
Yeah.
it's precious. It's absolutely precious, and it's
Yeah.
so critical for brain development,
Mhm.
but also processing and emotional regulation, right? That's
Oh,
when we're doing
that's
our REM
interesting.
cycling, right? And our eyes are
Yeah.
darting. That is our filing system. That's how we are processing things that we have gone through in the day. That
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
happen for a short period, right? You literally take baggage from yesterday and you bring it into the next day. And then
Got
again,
it.
right? So
Right.
sleep
What
is
a great place to
understated.
start then. If you have a kid
Absolutely.
that's struggling right now and you're seeing these differences in emotional, their emotional threshold or whatever,
Mhm.
what about a good place to start was
Yes,
just to observe and assess their sleep patterns. Is that
absolutely.
phone
And
really
take the
being
phone out of
take
the
it
room.
out.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, our house, we have, timer. I mean, my kids are young enough; they don't have phones or anything like that,
Right.
But I mean, for me, right? And, I mean, our Wi-Fi turns off at a certain time every night, right? And so even if I'm working late, it's like, oh yeah, it's a good reminder. Okay, yeah, I can do it tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Because even as adults, right, we have to be
Oh,
good
sure. You'll
examples
just
to our
power through.
kids.
Yeah.
You'll power through, right? I'm
Yeah.
going to do it all tonight, and
Yep.
and we still need those reminders, and
Guilty.
so yep,
Yeah.
totally,
Yeah. And
totally.
I don't know about you, but I sure feel it more now than I
Oh my
ever
gosh,
did. If I,
yes,
used to be able to go off a couple hours of sleep, no big deal for a few days, but
yep.
not anymore. No
Yep.
way.
Nope, not at all. And you
And
feel it, it takes so much longer to recover.
yeah. And as a teenager, they're requiring more sleep anyway.
Absolutely. Which, in our school district, this year they finally flipped the start times, where high schoolers start
Wow.
later. And there's been so many research articles published.
Yes.
I mean, the circadian rhythm, our sleep clock, is different depending what stage you are in life.
Right.
And high schoolers and adolescents have a shifted sleep cycle where they tend to be night owls and they tend to sleep late. Where,
Yes.
I mean, the longest time they're having to be at school at 7:45, it makes no
Yes.
sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So our school district finally flipped it this year, and now the elementary kids start first, middle school same, and then high schoolers start later. And that shift
That's
alone,
huge that they recognized it.
absolutely, in talking to the kids that I've been working with, they're like, this has been so helpful. So helpful because they
Wow.
can get an extra 45 minutes, and that's precious time, right?
Yeah,
Of
absolutely.
course,
That's wonderful to
athletics
hear.
move to the beginning of the day. So I'd say your athletics are still putting a kink in that, but
Right.
for the most part, it's been a really positive change.
Right. That's another thing I kind of wanted to address is you mentioned scheduling. Some of these kids' schedule with athletics coupled with these
Mm,
AP classes, and I mean, it's kind of mind blowing. Are you seeing that in some of the?
absolutely,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
what's a typical schedule look like of someone
Well,
that's kind of overscheduled?
there's so many different variations of that, but it's
Mhm.
more often than not, I'll see a child that's involved in 2 or more sports or activities at the same time. Like they may have choir and tennis or
Right.
some variation. So 2 extracurricular activities with, 1 or 2 or more AP classes. And
Right.
their feedback to me that their schedules are after school a few hours is whatever their extracurricular activities are, unless they're before school, right? Kids that
Right.
tend to have 2 sports, they usually have one before school, like swim
Right.
practice before school, and then they have whatever, soccer or whatever afterwards. So they have
Right.
2, then they have many hours of homework, and
Right.
a lot of them aren't getting done with homework until 10 or 11 at night. They're
Right.
so amped up, and they play on their phone for a couple of hours, and then they're not
Yeah.
getting into bed till like 1 o'clock.
Right.
That is not an uncommon schedule that I hear. And I'm
Right.
like, well, when do you see your friends? Oh, I don't, only on the weekends, right?
Right.
When are you sitting down with your family? Oh, I don't. I eat in my room when I'm doing
Right.
homework.
Right.
And that is something I think that is very important, is the disconnection of our family and our family unit, because we are all so busy.
Right.
Where's that point where everybody sits together and checks in
Right.
and has that relationship building on a day-to-day basis?
Right.
So
Which also could be hampering the kind of urge to want to get out and be independent at,
important.
after they turn 18 and in their early,
Mhm.
20s or so. If they've done all this work and been overscheduled for all this time and they finally graduate from high school, to get out like for more work.
For more work. That's so true. So true. Yeah.
So that would be a great place too for a parent to look at, just, really assess a kid's schedule and see maybe this is too much, and why,
Yep.
for what, why
For
are we
what?
doing?
What is the gain in the long run, right?
Yeah.
And I know a big push is scholarships, academic scholarships, sports scholarships, and things like that. And yeah, I think that does benefit a few, but at what cost? At what
Right.
cost? And how, graduating from college 2 years earlier, you know, they're still very young when they graduate. So is there that developmental component of kind of
Yeah.
that, where are they going in life? What are they going to do with this degree that they have? So I
Right.
think it's really shifting kind of how kids enter the world. And, like I
Yeah.
said, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak too much deeper on
Right.
that,
Of
but,
course.
but I just really question that in terms of that pressure. And,
Me too.
why can't we have more relaxed schedules like it used to be? Why does, sports at 4 years old have to be travel teams and
Yeah.
all of
And
this
why year long?
year long? Exactly. And
They don't
multiple
ever
hours.
stop.
It doesn't make sense to me. We need to bring back that family time and,
Yeah.
and really have that
And the
connection.
downtime so a kid can get a little bored.
Yeah, exactly. That's my brother's goal every summer. I can't wait to get my kids as bored as possible. That's what he tells me.
That's a great goal.
I love it.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, moving forward, I want to talk about your innovative program with ketamine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know it's a new developing thing and there's not a ton of research on it, but I would love for you to talk about it. So what is your clinic doing with ketamine therapy?
Yes. So we offer ketamine in a variety of different services. So ketamine is used in the treatment-resistant depression.
Okay.
Or we're looking at it for PTSD as
Right.
well. So
Can we just tell our listeners what is ketamine so we know what we're talking about here? Because I think the
yeah.
street name is Special K. That's what I learned while doing research about
Yes.
this.
So
So maybe
ketamine is
some people have more likely heard of that.
totally. Totally. So ketamine is an old time anesthetic. Okay. And so it's not really used for that anymore.
Right.
But what we've found is that lower doses, ketamine has multiple effects on glutamate receptors in the brain.
Okay.
And what we call neuroplasticity. So it was thought for a very long time that once our brain cells formed and like the unit was done, that was it. It was a fixed unit. If you
Okay.
damaged it, it was irreparable. If something happened, it was irreparable. And we know now that that's not true at all, right?
Right.
Our body's always evolving. And so that is called neuroplasticity, is the ability of our brain to morph and change, right? And adapt and grow
Right.
as we need it to grow.
Right.
And the question is how do we get it to do that? So ketamine is one of those agents that we know contributes to enhancing neuroplasticity in the brain.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
if you think about a person who is really stuck and deep down in depression,
Right.
I'll use the analogy of it feels like, or I would say people describe it as being stuck in a really small room with really high cement walls. Okay. And they're
Okay.
feeling like, how am I ever going to get out of this place? It feels
Right.
so helpless, so, dark, so lonely, all of those
Right.
things.
Right.
And so when somebody experiences ketamine, for the treatment resistant depression,
Mm-hmm.
the best way to describe it is that those walls get a lot shorter and they become almost like jello. Okay. Which means
Okay.
you can form them and change them,
Right.
right? And have you help move through the stages. Ketamine
Right.
seems to help people um, move through those really deep, dark stages of depression much better and
Okay.
quicker, which allows them to then go back and do some of those foundational pieces like working on the sleep cycle,
Right.
like eating better, right? Or eating
Right.
at all, right?
Yeah.
It depends kind of where people are at.
Right.
Exercise and movement, which have, like I said, plenty of literature to support their use in depression.
Right.
Just when a person gets in that space, the idea of eating a meal at a
It's just
regular schedule,
overwhelming.
it's overwhelming. It's
Yeah.
overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where some of those symptoms can seem insurmountable. And that's where ketamine can be really, really powerful. And we've had some pretty incredible stories of
Right.
people really just able to do some fantastic transformations because of that ability, like I said, to kind of create those jello walls, I like to
Right.
call them, which
Yeah.
allows them movement and flexibility where they thought was in a very rigid space.
So
So
is this accompanied with cognitive therapy then?
yes, it is accompanied with some type of psychotherapy. So
Okay.
we have a couple different ways that a patient can do this. One, we have our ketamine assisted psychotherapy that
Okay.
is done with one of our trained ketamine psychotherapists, where they're doing the session of ketamine and followed by an integration session. Okay,
Okay.
and that integration session is really going through what they experienced and how they can put
So
that into
talk
motion.
therapy.
Talk therapy, yep,
Yep.
exactly, integrating
Yep.
that ketamine experience. And then the other types of ketamine therapy are IV based, meaning that you can get an injection in your arm or they can put it
Okay.
directly into your vein. And those sessions, generally you require a couple of therapy sessions afterwards, but it may or may not be done directly after the session. So there's
Okay.
different approaches depending on what we're dealing with. So somebody who has a very significant trauma history,
Yeah.
don't
So
it's
PTSD.
PTSD, it's
Okay.
better to peel the layers a little bit slower. And so that is a really good example of someone that could benefit from ketamine assisted psychotherapy. It's a little bit slower process with a lot more integration. Okay.
Okay.
Like acute suicidal ideation, that's where we
Mm-hmm.
would likely do the IV therapy followed by
Okay.
psychotherapy as well,
Right.
because those bigger doses seem to affect that better. And so just depending on what the assessment is from the psychiatrist. So all
Right.
patients who are interested in ketamine have an intake with one of our psychiatrists.
Uh-huh.
They'll determine exactly which one of those paths makes sense for
Okay.
that particular patient.
And this is done in an outpatient type setting,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
So the patient can still go home.
They have to go home. Yep.
Yeah. And how many treatments is it? Because I know it's temporary.
It depends. So it really depends on kind of how patients respond. If we look at some of the literature, it was done over 6 sessions. So some clinics do 3 sessions times 2 weeks. We do 2 sessions times 3 weeks,
Okay.
a little bit slower. And that way there's more time for integration. But we have found that patients sometimes don't even need that many, right? And if you get a big breakthrough, so that's like I would say the cookie cutter protocol, but that doesn't mean that that's actually what's done every time. Yeah.
Right. Because again, we're so all individual that it's not going to work exactly for just everybody the same.
Exactly. And the ketamine assisted psychotherapy sessions, those are a little bit more flexible. Right. So those might be 1 session a week for 8 weeks, or might be 1 every other week. So it's really working to kind of see the response and making sure that that person is super well supported from their psychotherapist that's doing the integration for each step. Yeah.
But what an amazing another option.
Another option.
Especially, I don't think the general public who has not suffered from depression understands exactly how intense that hole can be with the walls so high up. I think it's hard for us that if we have not suffered from depression to really understand that, but that is a real reality for people who are suffering with depression, and to not be responsive to other therapies. Now they have a rope. You're throwing them a rope.
You're throwing them a rope. It's just like somebody who has chronic migraines. Like, you would never expect somebody who has in the heat of a really intense migraine to get up and make dinner or go pick the kids up from school, right? We can wrap our minds around that because we have all had a headache at some point in our lives. And we can at least in some way say, oh man, I couldn't imagine.
Function.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine what a headache 100 times worse than what I've experienced might feel like, right? But we have that connection because, again, it's a medical condition. But when we jump into that mental health realm, for some reason, there's a loss of empathy, right? And we need to drop that, right? People who are suffering deep down from depression, it's just like an asthmatic who tried to run a mile and now they can't breathe. It's not. It's bigger than them. It is their body doing this to them. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, especially having just talked about how the gut can affect, even ailments like autism and other, like it's a real manifestation. And it's all coming from your body
and mind and spirit, right? So it's that combination of everything in together. And so really dropping that stigma that it's not like somebody can just snap out of it, right? Can't just snap out of it, right? You can't snap out of an asthma attack. Try. You can't snap out of a migraine. Try, right?
Yeah.
Process. It's a process. So
that's such a great way to put it. It is, there are other things that you can try. And if you're dealing with all of the symptoms that your body's talking to you with, you have such a better chance of getting well, other than just, taking something to cover up the symptom.
Absolutely. So we have tools that help people out of acute depression, right? Severe debilitating depression. And then we have tools that help prevent those depression cycles from coming back. These tools are different from each other, right? So we have a tool to break a migraine cycle, but that's a different tool than what it is to how are you going to figure out your triggers and figure out exactly what is causing that. Those are different things. And so we need to really understand that there is the immediate, addressing and what are we doing long-term. And so there's overlap for sure, but I mean, they're different. It's different.
And ketamine is an immediate.
It is an immediate, which can lead to long-term changes too, right? But again, it's about building in and pulling all the other tools in, and we need a foundation. You can't get around it. If you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you don't ever exercise and move your body, and you don't have a healthy relationship in your life or a healthy sense of self, we have to work on those things.
Right. Is this, would this be considered microdosing?
No.
Or is that something totally different?
Something totally different.
Okay.
Yeah, microdosing
is microdosing a lot in the media right now. I think people are kind of, it's a buzzword.
It is a buzzword, and that's used for different substances, mostly in like psychedelics, not necessarily. There's a little bit of microdosing, I think, that happens in the ketamine world, but that's not really what we're doing.
Okay. Yeah. Great. So having covered this wide spectrum of topics here today, what would you say that you could say that these are 3 simple lifestyle shifts that you could make to get on the path or stay on the path of optimum mental health?
Well, first one is routine. Like, we cannot avoid a routine. We are creatures of habit. Okay. And we need a routine. So generally speaking, people should be waking up and going to bed at about the same time every single day. Okay.
Okay.
And then within that cycle of routine, it's really looking at what other things comprise of our routine throughout the day. Like we generally eat lunch at this time, right? Because when things get chaotic, when people get stressed out, when their schedules get really busy, it's pretty easy to forget to eat lunch, right?
Yeah.
Pretty easy to say, oh man, I haven't stood up from my desk in 4 hours. I haven't even rested my legs, right? Or I haven't had a glass of water. Right. So routine is key. And then, so some patients I'm looking at routines at every 20 minutes and we tried to build like an actual strict routine for them. Others we're doing generalities, but routine is key for anything.
Yeah, especially I think when you're dealing with a crisis type situation in your life, which, there's always, if there's a fire going on in your life, so to speak, of course you have to put it out, but you have to be mindful about not jumping into the fire fully.
Correct. Yes. Correct.
And trying to maintain some kind of routine, because that will protect your mental health a little bit.
It will protect and your physical health, right? Because we see people just pushing themselves, right? And then something else happens, right? And now
there's always going to be something else.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing.
Exactly. There's always going to be. So we have to manage better.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's a really great one. And I think, we all did that for our kids when they were babies.
Yeah, we're such strict. I mean, that's like what moms do, right? They set their routine. Your bedtime is this, lights out, upstairs.
Yep. But it kind of goes out the window when we get on our own.
It really does. It really does. And kind of going back to that, because that's comforting, right? If you don't know what's coming up next, that inherently causes stress, right? If you have, even if it's a loose routine of saying, oh yeah, okay, I got this break at this hour, 12, and, I do my admin time. I'm going to check email at 3:00 and, these general things. All of a sudden there's a sense of peace because you know what's coming up, right?
Yes.
You don't, and your world is chaos, right? That chaos is internalized. And as a result, it changes the way our hormones are secreted. So we're now producing a lot more stress hormones, right? Which is going to really affect energy. It's
totally
going to
makes sense.
increase anxiety. So, just that simple thing is really important.
Right.
So I'm a big routine pusher with that. And then I'll lump together the food. Food is a humongous topic, of course.
Yes.
But food and drink, if we're trying to hit some big ones, is to make sure that meals are protein centered. And for mental health, it is better if you can eat within 2 hours of waking. Okay, I know right now there's this big boom of intermittent fasting and keto, and people are trying to do, 18-hour fast, 6-hour, these are fads. These are complete fad diets. And, for a small majority of people, they help, but in the long run, not really going to be that helpful to be fasting 18 hours a day, every day. That's very stressful for the system. Okay.
Right.
So eating regularly within 2 hours of waking up, and then no longer than 4 hours between meals. If we're trying to stabilize the stress response.
Right. And you say protein-based, and how do you feel about sugar?
Oh, I'm not a big fan of sugar. I'm definitely not a big fan of processed sugar by any aspect. And so my philosophy is, though it's not an all or none, we have to learn moderation. And moderation starts with what we put in our shopping carts, right? And so we know that 61% of calories that Americans eat is from processed bread-like products. So cookies, crackers, Danishes, pretzels, all of that, right? Yeah. And where is that coming from? It's coming from when we go to the grocery store. So we need to start to fill those carts with different things, because if your option, when kids come home from school, or when you're coming home from work and you're starving, there's a bag of chips there, or there's a handful of baby carrots, 9 times out of 10, doesn't matter who you are, you're going to grab the chips, right? Because you have immediate satisfaction. The chips are no longer an option. And you're like, okay, well, I've got carrots or cherry tomatoes or a handful of blueberries, right? It doesn't matter the option you choose. It's a good option, right? And you take a handful while you're cooking dinner.
Right. Set yourself up for success.
Set yourself up for success and get that stuff out of the house, right? Or set limits on it. Like, I buy 1 bag of chips a week. When it's gone, right? It's not, I'm going to buy it, I'm going to go to the grocery store 3 days later, I'm going to buy another one, and I'm going to buy 4 boxes of cereal. No, you buy one, and then that way it's there, and you learn moderation. When it's gone, and think of something else,
Right.
And so there's a lot of ways to do it, and it's not about deprivation. It's about setting yourself up for success, and how do we get more things in?
Right.
that are better for us, right? If we look at the whole gut microbiome piece, our gut microbiome is dependent on fiber in our diet. Okay.
Yes.
We are severely fiber deficient
Yes.
on the upwards of 15 grams a day. Okay. So, I mean,
Right.
we should be striving for about 40 grams of fiber a day. And you can do that if you eat cherry tomatoes and blueberries when you get home, or snack on snap peas, right? You can
Right.
do it. It's
Yeah.
very difficult to do. It's impossible to do. Potato chips have no fiber in them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
that's a good one. And your third thing?
So third thing, this is a toss up because I think in terms of, there's so many things I can pinpoint, but I'm going to come back to sleep. I'm going to come back to that. We need to really put back the importance of sleep, and programs like a lot of the streaming programs that are available,
Yes.
Netflix and Hulu and all these now, they really are hindering us from doing that because they automatically start the next episode,
Right.
whether you want it or not. You've got 30 seconds, 30 short seconds, right? To be like, oh, I'm tired, I need to go to bed, right? And it really just, there's so many things now that are keeping us awake. And so really making sleep a priority, I cannot stress enough on how much better you'll feel. The other part too is not only do we need enough hours of sleep, but we need to make sure that those hours are quality sleep. So even if you're a person that's in bed, and I'm in bed 9 hours a night, but I toss and turn and I don't sleep, right? So we need to make sure that those hours are quality. And if quality sleep is not being achieved, then we need to work on quality, right? It's not just quantity.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to sneak this little thing in there too, because I know a lot of people rely on alcohol in their diet and for sleep. Some people will have alcohol to sleep. How do you feel about that? What kind of sleep is that creating?
Not good, not good.
Yeah.
So the studies on alcohol show that it decreases the deep levels of sleep, which are your more restorative types of sleep. So it makes you tired, right? So it's relaxing. You have a glass of wine, you have a beer, you have something like that. It kind of takes the edge off and you relax. But actually it creates a relaxation that's not a deep relaxation, and it affects your sleep cycle. So you actually get poor quality of sleep. When alcohol is in place. Does that mean never have alcohol? No. If it's moderation and in different phases in life, as women get older with hormone changes, they tend to not do as well with wine and things like that at night. But that doesn't mean you can't have some, small glass of lunch if it's appropriate, or, build it into your day another time, or from a social piece. But good quality sleep is hydration, right? So staying really hydrated, make sure temperature control in the room is, most people sleep better in a cooler temperature. So, try to adjust that, and darkness, right? And so we live in cities now. We need to make sure you have blackout curtains or just do an eye mask, because that's really going to affect melatonin secretion in the brain if there's any light coming through.
Right. And what about people who work nights with sleep? How does that affect, I'm going to kind of lump this in there with it. How does it affect, obviously, your sleep pattern, but also with anxiety and depression? How is that affecting people?
It's affecting them a lot. And I think that that's a really big topic to cover. We have our set sleep rhythm, or it's called our body clock. And, us as humans, we naturally follow this body clock. And so our deepest sleep is typically achieved between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning as like our deepest, most restorative sleep cycle. And so when you are forced to be awake during that, even if you're sleeping at, let's say, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., you're still not going to get the same sleep, right?
Quality,
the temperature is different, right? We're just programmed to be awake. And so there are some studies done on more chronic illnesses, more rates of, heart attacks. I mean, you name it, across the board in shift workers and individuals that don't have non-traditional hours, we'll call it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we've covered a lot here today, and I know that, this is so interesting to me. I could talk to you forever, really. There's so much stuff to learn, but I love that we've covered that there are options. There are options out there that can be helpful, and there is a lifeline out there, and there's things you haven't tried, and I'm 100% sure that you can help with that.
Yes. Well, thank you for this opportunity to share even just a sample. Our goal is to establish hope, right? Never give up hope. There's a lot of options, and we're here to look at that not so common path looked at.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
So our center is the Wholeness Center. We are in Fort Collins, Colorado. Our website is www.wholeness.com. And then our Facebook page as well is the Wholeness Center. And you can also find us on Instagram at Mary Rondeau ND.
That's awesome. And I really hope that, I know people will get so much information from this and reach out to you, because I know you have a lot of hope to offer.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Tammy. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Mary. Have a great day. And thank you for being on the Naturally Inspired podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you.
If the naturally inspired movement makes sense to you, let's do this together and transform the medical model and help people take charge of their health. Learn more about how you can join the Naturally Inspired movement by going to naturallyinspiredadvocate.com or call me at 970-475-4862.